Good morning. My name is Chris Stein, Business Development Manager at Future Men, where we talk about supporting a better future for every boy, every man, and everyone. This morning, we're talking with the fathers team at Future Men. So if we can go around the room, if you guys could just say your name, your position, and the work that you deliver. Owen, can we start with you?
Yeah, hi, good morning. My name's Owen Thomas. I'm the head of programs for the Fathers team and for the Fathers work here at Future Men. I basically manage the team of great Fathers workers you see before you, as well as contribute on strategic discussions and training and research around issues affecting fathers and their families.
Thanks very much. Elliot.
Good morning, all. My name's Elliot Wright Clark. I am the Young Fathers Project Coordinator for the London Borough of Southwark for the team. So I support young fathers within the Borough of Southwark, helping them to navigate the challenges of fatherhood and overcome, or at least attempt to overcome, any needs that they may have relating to being a father.
Fantastic. Paul. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, Chris. How you doing? My name is Paul McDaniel. I'm a Fathers Development Coordinator in the London Borough of Lewisham. I'm also a specialist domestic abuse advisor and worker in the said borough. I am also part and parcel of the Future Dads program, which is engaging, about to become fathers, in getting them ready for fatherhood and being prepared to be the best father they can be for their child.
And last but certainly not least, Ahmed.
Good morning. My name is Ahmed Abdulani. I'm the project coordinator for the Fathers for Futures parenting program. We're here to help fathers to enhance their child-parent relationship, to give children the best possibility and best start in life.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I really want to hone in on the topic of masculinity. We're recording this for International Men's Day 2021, and the discussion around the topic of masculinity is a key focal point of this year's International Men's Day. So, Elliot, if we jump to you for a second, can you tell us a little bit about how it's really kind of from your viewpoint, from the experience you have of working with young fathers, how does masculinity affect the cohort that you work with?
Wow, how does it affect the cohort I work with? It's so vast, it's so wide. It affects the men, the young boys, in ways that you can't really capture. We'd need so much longer to capture the whole ways, but it seeps into their total being in relation to every relationship that they have, and most importantly, the relationship that they have with themselves. Masculinity, if you were to ask maybe 10 people, 100 people what masculinity means, you'd get 10 or 100 different versions of their opinion. So we're all trying to strive to be whatever we feel masculinity is, in a world where it is changing rapidly and ideas are coming into the ether all the time. This has affected the young men that I work with in ways where they find it's like the goalposts are just forever moving, and when you feel like you've got it, you still haven't got it, if that makes sense. What does that look like in real life? It means the relationships that they have with their children, with their spouses, with service providers, with strangers. They're very different, and they are, how could I say, you couldn't put it on a dartboard and pin it to one thing, if that makes sense. For example, one father may be having issues in regards to how he parents his child in regards to gender roles.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I remember a father asking me if I was to give my child, because I also have a young child, so we relate. It's easy to make things relatable when we talk about our children in real terms. If I was to give my young son, who is 14 months, a pink flamingo, would you give it to him? And it was a cuddly toy. And I was like, yeah, it's pink. What has that got? The stickling point was the fact that it was pink, but I'm like, flamingos are pink in real life. So it's not like it's a pink crocodile. And even if it was a pink crocodile, what difference would it make? I think that the essence of what he was getting at is it's pink, it's for girls. And I'm like, even myself as a child, I played with dolls because I had lots of girl cousins, and it didn't affect me negatively the same way I played with action men. So he was very conscious about what toys, the impact of the different toys that he plays with, which toys are for boys, which toys are for girls. And we're living in a world where sometimes it's scary to even have your opinion, for fear of your opinion being wrong, for fear of people ostracizing you, challenging you, for fear of people categorizing you as bad, so to speak.
Yeah.
So something as simple as what toy for your young child to play with, where an infant child, a child under the age of 1 or in between 1 and 18 months, they're just exploring the world. They haven't grasped, their language hasn't been formed. They just see things and they just instinctually gravitate to things. It starts from as early as that and before that.
So you've brought in a whole bunch of topics here about the definition of masculinity, how it's changeable, how diverse it is, and also you've talked about the intergenerational play in fatherhood, and how potentially we are transmitting stories, narratives between generations that are transmitted to us as well. Paul, can I come over to you and your work around domestic abuse, which is quite a provocative topic, and one that is very, very key in the sort of cultural narrative of today. And how does masculinity impact or affect others that you're working with, and the work that you deliver to those fathers?
Okay, so yeah, it impacts in a great way because there are a lot of the young men as well as older fathers that we work with that have some difficulties in recognizing what positive masculinity is in relation to domestic abuse, for example, and how to deal with conflict as a man. Is dealing with conflict being violent and being abusive towards your partner? Or is dealing with conflict about sitting down and being a man and being able to have a conversation and talking through and coming to an agreement, or with your partner around behaviors or situations that you both find yourselves in? I think it's very important that when we're talking about men who are abusive, that's really important to recognize and understand that on the one hand, this is not about being a violent person. Men are not violent as far as I'm concerned. We can be non-violent, and I think it's very important to start presenting that in the work that we do. And a lot of the work that I do around working with men who commit abusive acts towards their partners, and their has been around really getting them to start thinking about what it means to be a man. And it's those thoughts and link into masculinity, obviously, because at the end of the day, what does it really mean to be a man? And when I challenge a lot of the cases that I work with around that, I'd like to put it like this: it's stereotypes versus positive role models, positive male role models. We have the stereotypes of what it means to be a man, and the stereotypes, man up, things like stop crying. You can tell her what you want. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we should be able to start thinking seriously about, as a service, how we now present what it means to be a man and what masculinity means to us as a service. And part of my work is about promoting what it means to be a man from a future men point of view, but also as an individual. I'm a man, with children as well. And you know, I want to be able to protect at every given point my children as well as keep them safe. But sometimes in relationships that I'm now working with, that seems to be the issue, in terms of um, being able to protect or support your or keep your child safe. So being a man for me, and a lot of those particular stereotypes really need to be challenged at every given point. And I think that's the key thing here, challenging men's understandings of what it means to be a man and what masculinity means to them.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. So expanding on the points of Eliot and this sort of idea of diversity and changeability of the definition of masculinity, you've also really brought in behavior, communication,
Yeah.
And that sort of challenging men to men. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so this is your understanding of masculinity supporting you? Is it healthy to you? Is it healthy to your family, your partners, your communities, your society, and what role do we all play in challenging this for those better futures that I talked about as being core to the vision of Future Men earlier? Ahmed, can we come over to you and take this conversation a little bit further in terms of your work and how masculinity affects the fathers that you work with and the work, how you tackle masculinity in that work?
Well, thank you, Chris. I mean, within the parenting program, it's slightly different because in the past I've worked with lots of mothers, and the appearance of father was actually kind of always missing. It's almost like they're not involved as much in parenting the children. So therefore, when we're doing the parenting class, we try to invite the fathers, and within the course, we see so many different background and people from different continents. Sometimes if you have a group of 10 people, you could have people from every dot of the world. So the meaning of masculinity to them is completely different from each other. And that can start from the way they discipline the children. It can be quite, some of them would like to take the harsh approach, and others which is obviously would mean punishment rather than discipline. And we try to change that. There's a difference between punishment and discipline. So discipline is about teaching the child. Punishment can actually put fear into it. But often I'll bring it back also to the whole family and the mothers. And when I used to do parenting classes with the mothers, some of them used to say to the child, wait until your dad comes home. So start from a very young age, and some of the fathers used to say to me that the mother actually said that, and when I want to go home, I want to hug my child. I don't want to really have them to have that scared feeling of me being home. So I think changing the meaning of masculinity is not just about men, is actually about the whole society as a whole, and the mothers as well. They can play a role in that. So teaching them the process of discipline, they're actually built on having a relationship that is based on dignity and love, and being kind to the child, actually, and creating that understanding. Is not about putting fear into the child by trying to show that dad is going to scare them when they come home. Is very important. So also we talk about the parts about emotion, and I think Eliot and Paul have tapped into that. Sometimes children, based on their gender, they're being asked to show or not show their emotion from a very young age. Paul mentioned that don't cry, men don't cry, from a very young age. So sometimes we come across men within the course that actually don't know how to express their feeling and emotion. And there is so many different words. How can you model that to your child if you don't know how to actually express your emotion yourself? So there's lots of angles when it comes into parenting that we need to obviously work on and teach. It can show that it's quite hard to start to attract men into these courses at the beginning, but once they come to the course, from our experience, they really don't want to leave, because they can see that this is really important and actually touching a need that they have, and it's really relevant to their lives and to their children and their future.
Thank you. And I think it's really fascinating to hear about the impact and the role that that mothers and partners play potentially in upholding some of these cultural norms and expectations about fathers and males within the family structure, and the concept of discipline, chastisement. It's really interesting to hear that, and it's also very interesting. I was recently in one of the youth clubs that we manage, and I was talking to a group of boys about masculinity and femininity. And one of there were multiple key moments that came through, but one of the really interesting key moments, and it touched upon what you're talking about there, is that when I asked for traditional definitions or character types of masculine versus feminine, one of the interesting thing was if something was on the feminine side, it could not be in the masculine side. So, for example, caring was attached more to femininity. And I was like, well, can it not be that a male could be caring? And this was a group of young boys, really. They were kind of maybe anywhere between 13 and 16, so quite young and quite formative. And according to this group, it was like, no, that is much more like, that's more feminine. And to tap into the feminine is to demonstrate some type of weakness as a male. And I thought that was very interesting. And it comes, but what you're saying there, Ahmed, is that that's something that potentially is supported by both sides of the equation. Owen, if we could jump to you, obviously we've talked a lot about sort of these issues of definition, diversity, the roles that the genders play. You, as the manager of this team, how do you sort of reflect on masculinity and support the team to support fathers to redefine masculinity and think about masculinity more broadly?
Well, primarily, I mean, I'm so lucky to have a team like this. Like, I'm going at the end of, all four of yours kind of submissions, brief as they were really insightful on this subject. And I think that the best I can do is allow kind of like a space for everyone to reflect and learn off each other, not only within the Fathers team, but more broadly across our organization. There's so many good people doing work directly with men and boys who are living real lives, listening to their stories, understanding the situations that they come up with and they're faced with, often problems, and they've built relationships with these men and boys that are strong enough that the men and boys are honest with them about how they're feeling and what's going on. That in itself is a massive milestone. That is something that a lot of services struggle to do, are not set up to do. Far too few, in my opinion, services really care about men until they're in some sort of massive crisis or need, until they're either been hurt and damaged themselves or they've done that to somebody else. That tends to be when services kick in for men. Thankfully, there are changes afoot in society. We're on the vanguard of that and have been around for a long time doing it as Future Men and previously as working with men before that. But ideally, I think even your case study, if anything, is a real kind of demonstration of why we're doing this work. If at 13 to 16 years old, you're so, and by all means, this is not all boys that we work with or that exist in Britain, in London where we're working, but it's a trope that we see repeated, that at that time in your life, you are more kind of, because you're less sure of who you are and you're in a stage where you're trying to find something new, it's really dangerous sometimes, depending on where you live and what community you're in, to kind of waver from that norm that was talking about, that demonstration that Elliot gave of the father querying whether he should give his infant son a certain kind of toy. That's because of an insecurity with him about, am I doing right by my son, teaching him how to be the next generation of men in this society? Because for many, it's not just a choice of, I want to be a misogynistic pig. It's a choice of, if I waver from the norm that's set out for me about what a man should be, it could actually be quite dangerous. It could lessen my chances of success in life. It could physically put me at risk of other people's views of masculinity when I'm an outlier from that within my community. And whilst we live here in Britain with very modern ideas of what it is to be a man about, and very kind of increasingly egalitarian attitudes to both men and women in society, we also have to recognize that doesn't reflect the breadth of society. We live in a more divided society. Whilst we're more diverse in many ways, we're also more marginalized and sectioned off and siloed in some aspects of society. We're not as together, so we're not necessarily taking the learning from each other. Technology has allowed us to find ways to just go and be with like-minded people and only ever talk to like-minded people who agree with the things that I agree with, and never the twain, i.e. people who have a different viewpoint than me, shall meet. And that's a really big part of what we do as well, as Ahmed described, getting men from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds, pulling them together and actually showing them what they share in common is really important. And I think that's important across humanity as a whole. But for men, it's really important as well, because it allows them to be honest and speak about things like their emotions, how they process their emotions. You know, things like love, as Ahmed said, I've come home from a hard day at work or being out, or, you know, my wife's been at work and we're handing over the childcare and responsibilities to each other. And I find out there's actually some bad behavior stored up from earlier in the day that I'm now expected to just walk in and deal with somehow. And that just reinforces a negative trope about, well, why have I got to be the bringer of, you know, lay the smackdown sort of thing? No, I don't want to do that. I want to be fun and playful. And actually, a lot of studies show that that's what men do, and they're great at doing that. You know, we encourage our children to play and explore through different means. We use humor a bit more, maybe. We take risks a bit more, sometimes in play, which is really important for kids to understand and explore their boundaries. But that shouldn't be all we're doing. You know, those gender tropes, and this is important as well, the difference between gender and sex, and the idea that gendered behaviors, masculinity, femininity, are the behaviors that are associated traditionally with one sex or another. We're in a time of great change and great transition in society. And, you know, when I've spoken to men and fathers and boys before about their masculinity, just as you, it's interesting, because not only do boys themselves find it unpalatable to associate themselves with behaviors that are deemed as feminine. Conversely, when you turn that around and you actually want, you've got boys and men actually demonstrating positive traits in terms of their caregivers, they're showing that they're vulnerable, they're showing that they're emotional. People are telling them, oh, you're very feminine in your behaviors, you're very in touch with your feminine side, which when you've got men on the cusp of actually starting to own some of these behaviors can be quite negative, can cause them to withdraw a little bit and go, well, no, that's not what I was trying to do. I was just trying to be me. But now you're saying to me, I'm a woman, you know, and they don't want to be that. You know, what they want to be is,
it comes back to that it comes back to this idea of danger, or perhaps the word, danger is quite a strong word. I'm not taking away from your use of that word, because I think that there are parts of society, some of the parts of society that Future Men supports, where it actually is dangerous, because
it could be physically dangerous.
Yes.
But for other guys where maybe they're not living in such kind of rarefied communities which exist, where there's violence, or you're on the fringes of serious youth violence or gang violence or whatever, there are other problems. Say you're a working class guy and you've got into the building trade or something like that. There is this dynamic when you're working in a very male environment, where if you start challenging too many of the male kind of expectations of how men interact in the workplace, you're going to be an outlier. Your opportunities to progression in work might be curtailed. So there's a danger there to your socioeconomic outcomes. You know, as someone else alluded to, you know, there are women also that have an expectation of men being traditional men. They find those things attractive. They look for those qualities in the men that they want to pair up with. So if I start displaying too much of a modern outlook on life, and the people I'm engaging with don't agree with that, that might be dangerous in terms of people, you know, especially with the young guys, the teenage boys you were displaying, being told that they're not living up to the proper standard, therefore you're unattractive to me. You know, you're not a go-getter, you're not chasing the money hard enough, you haven't got enough money, you're not as assertive as you should be, in their view, to be a man. And I think there's a risk there, even to one's own well-being and sense of self. You know, it's all about identity, you know, and your sex and your gender roles attached to your sex play a big part in you understanding who you are, along with your ethnicity and your religious and your cultural background. All of these things combine and intersect to make you who you are. And at these kind of younger ages, which we all know now in the 21st century are drawn out, kind of like this adolescent period into adulthood is drawn out now. It used to be, you know, in society at 16 or 18, you were working, you were in the world of work, you were a fully fledged adult. Now you've got people into their 30s that are still kind of living this developmental lifestyle, not really honed in on a career yet. Maybe you haven't had kids yet, you're not responsible. When that hits you all of a sudden, it's a lot to think about. So as Paul kind of alluded to with the Future Dads course, our belief system is whether you're doing Fathers Futures, which is for dads of children of all age, whether you're doing one-to-one specialist work with a project like Elliot's, where you're a young dad with maybe some additional needs that you're working with, or whether you're just a generic dad and it's your first child and you're going to a local hospital, men should be getting information and advice about what the expectations of their role is, what the practical requirements of their role is, what their children and what their partners need from them, and actually the space to explore who do you want to be now, given all of this information. Do you want to fit into the stereotype that's been given to you, not just by your family, not just by your mum and your dad or your school, but by every kind of thing around you? Or do you want to risk breaking that up and actually doing something that you find actually would be more beneficial to you, to your child, your family, and everyone around you? You know, and with maturity, it's easier for men to make those decisions. With a degree of socioeconomic freedom and liquidity, you can go, oh yeah, I'm not worried about that. I've got my network of friends. I can afford to pay for extracurricular things. I'll do that. When you're on the margins of society, it's much more difficult for you to do that. It's much more difficult for you to have the practical means and the emotional and psychological tools to be able to do that. So all of our projects, whichever guys they come in, starts beginning to allow men to explore that, giving them models of the positive ways of doing things. And basically, hopefully, start a conversation that can be ongoing back and forth where we learn from them and they learn from us.
You know, listen, I think it's very clear in this discussion that we could talk about this for a long time. And if we were to expand this conversation into more of a discussion group where we're eliciting responses from other people, this could go on and on and on. We do have to put a cap to it at some point. But I want to offer the floor to everybody just to make a final comment before we wrap up. So anybody who wants to kind of chime in on any of the points that we've made and any sort of final statements, please go ahead.
Can I say, because you've mentioned about the caring, and funny enough, one of the questions that I asked at last week's session, how do you relax? How do you give yourself time for relaxation? So we all expressed it differently. When you have one saying, I go to the gym to pump my muscles up, that's how he relaxes. You have another father saying, I like to have my bath and put this nice smell in it and just relax in the bath. So when we all see it differently, so you have other fathers looking and thinking, what, do you really do that? And I can relate to that personally because I like to have a bath, you know? So it's kind of like, it's we all see it differently, and often it's very hard to answer such a very simple question. How do you relax as a man?
I think you're tapping into a very sort of core of our psychological self. How we regulate our central nervous system is a really key thing, because if we're just constantly walking around in stress, anxiety, high levels of cortisol, that's not a great place to be, quite frankly. So I think that that's a really great question to ask ourselves and others. How do you relax, and what is the difference in your state and in your mind as you go through relaxation? Thanks for adding that in, Ahmed. Any other, Elliot? You're chomping at the bit. Go for it.
It's funny because we're talking about masculinity, and you can't talk about one without talking about the other. But we're not going to focus on femininity today. But I read a comment earlier over just last week, and it said masculinity, it pertains to what it is to be a man. So naturally, femininity pertains to what it is to be a woman. But in society, we've kind of decided that to be feminine is all of the things that are not men like. But femininity and being a woman, historically, almost probably up until today, still is, although we're changing, is to be a second-class citizen, because women are they have been second-class citizens. So when we're telling men that we need to be more like these ways which we are ascribing to be feminine, you're almost trying to tell men to be second-class, and no one wants to be second-class citizens, because we see some of us are not ready to accept it, but all of the outliers and all of the evidence is there that women get treated differently. They get treated as it pertains to comparatively to men. They're not on the same level as how we treat men, so to speak, in all areas of society. So when we're telling men to be more caring and more emotional, in our mindset, we know that that is to be like a woman, and to be like a woman it's not advantageous. But we're trying to see that there are advantages, but there's that conflict going on. So when I read that, I was just like, it made me think a little bit.
It's a really interesting point, and I this is a personal view, so this is not the view of Future Men, but I also feel like for girls, young women, and women who display potentially traditionally masculine traits such as, I don't know, assertiveness or decision making, that there comes with that a kind of, you go girl, this is a good thing, whereas if a guy was to potentially exhibit traditionally feminine traits, as we've all alluded to, and I think Owen, your word of potentially dangerous in certain sections of society, you can see that there's a lack of maybe not equality is the word, but there's certainly a lack of flexibility around these things. And I think that what we're doing at Future Men, the work that you guys are doing with fathers, and that aspect of fatherhood is so key because it's intergenerational. Other aspects of our work support the individual, but you are supporting a long lineage, which is just, when you think of it like that, it's an incredible thing that you're doing. So, does anybody else want to make any final points on this?
I just wanted to say that sometimes in terms of when we're working with boys, young men and older men, as well as including fathers, sometimes we even realize that the words that we use are really important when we're exploring masculinity. So again, when we're working with younger men, if we start talking about masculinity straight away, they may not have an understanding of what we're talking about. But if you ask the question, what does it mean to be a man, to a 13-year-old, he's more likely to think about it. Okay, and then realize, okay, well, I didn't know what masculinity is, but when you ask me the question, what it means to be a man, this is what I think about that. So I think the words that we use when we're exploring and trying to discover with the groups that we work with what it means to be a man or what masculinity means to them, I think the words that we use are going to be very important. So just to kind of really highlight that as well.
Fantastic point, really fantastic point. My own practitioner background of having worked with young people in youth offending services, as well as those who are at risk of school exclusion, and both girls and boys, is that, and this is a gross generalization, but frequently if I ask girls, how do you feel about something, I get a response back. Whereas with boys, I often had to ask, what do you think? It's a very different kind of nuance in the language. So that's an excellent point. And I hope that anybody that's watching this who does work with boys, young men, and men hones in on that idea of language for eliciting response. Great point, Paul.
Yeah.
Owen, I know you're chomping as well.
Well, I'm kind of just, everything you're saying, again, it resonates so much. We're all here, we're the choir, we're singing to each other here. But it's so important what you was talking about there. Emotional literacy is so important. It's something that traditionally we don't culturally instill, that we don't value that as a trait for boys and men to have. But as we become older, as some of us here, depending on the color of your beard today, as you sit here, gentlemen, you learn how important that is to you as you get older, as you become a parent, whether it be relationships with other adults, family members, loved ones, spouses, partners, but especially when it comes to your children as they grow up and around you, you have to have a degree of emotional literacy. There's a great study out that says men who have daughters, it teaches them empathy, they get to understand, it gives them a greater insight into the lives of women if they didn't already have that, because obviously here's a bit of yourself outside of your own sex and gender that's existed in the world, and you want the best for that. So how do you achieve that? You have to soften your worldview, and you don't want to have to be one of those, as a man, you don't want to be a bodyguard to the female members of your family your whole life, walking around after them, making sure they're safe from other men. We want to create a world where, our daughters, our partners, our sisters, our mums can walk around and be free and live their lives and be whatever they want to be. You don't want them beholden to the traps. My 7, 8-year-old, 9-year-old now daughter in school with boys telling her, you can't like Star Wars, that's not for girls. Why do you want to play football? That's not for girls. And you think, well, isn't it sad that in the 21st century, quite deep into the 21st century we are now, a couple of decades in, we're still having these struggles. It shows you that there is something to be done. So your point to us of working with fathers, why I'm still doing it after all these years, is because not only have you got an opportunity to work with a man, a young man sometimes, or an older man, it could be a very older man, could be a granddad sometimes in front of you that we're working with for our father services, who needs some support and some help himself. He needs a bit of reflection. He needs a voice. He needs an ear, someone to listen to. He needs a different critical kind of friend who's non-judgmental, who's professional, but definitely cares about them and their situation. That's really important. Care. that we demonstrate that we care about the people we're working with, but not only for them, but for their children and the wider society as well. You know, we feel as though we are actually helping a whole series of people here. So, you know, it's almost a no-brainer for me that this kind of work, whether it's done by us, whether it's done by frontline statutory services, we really have to improve our offer to men and fathers. You know, the ripple effects of the benefits moving forward, if we want to change society, are essential. You know, Elliot's completely right. We still live in a patriarchy. We're still some way from dismantling that. You know, if we want to bring about equality, not only here in the Western developed world where we all live and we're all quite comfortable, if we want to bring it about in the rest of the world, we need to encourage men to take up more of their role within the family. We need to support men to know that they're not going to be any weaker if they give up some of their perceived power and allow their daughters to enter the workplace and enter further education and become more educated and potentially earn more than us. Why not? You know, I think we have to free things up in society, and unless you engage men around that process, unless you have meaningful long-term relationships and pieces of work, unless you teach fathers when they're expecting their children, you know, and start engaging with them about some of the tropes, some of the issues, not just a practical hands-on changing nappies and taking temperatures and feeling how warm a bath is, but actually, you know, what is the share of your work within the household? How do you feel about taking on some of the housework while your partner tries to get baby to latch on to breastfeed? And if you're not breastfeeding and you want to do some feeding, how do you negotiate bottle feeding and who does what and who does night shifts? Simple conversations like that lead on to deeper conversations about discipline that Ahmed was talking about meaningful relationships with your children where you're not using maybe the techniques that were used on you, intimidation and fear. Do your work, otherwise, you know, behave yourself, or wait, as Ahmed said, wait till your dad gets home and you'll get that clip round here. Why don't we move it to a more evolved, if you want for a better word, place? But to be able to do that, men have to feel well within themselves. They have to have a good sense of self-esteem. They have to feel secure. They have to feel like they've got some value in life. And if I give up some of this stuff that I'm holding on to so tightly that makes me me, actually, it's going to be better for me. That will never happen unless they have someone they trust and people around them and networks around them to hold their hand and carry them and shine the light to show them where they need to go. And I think I'm really lucky, and we're really lucky across the board in this organisation, not only for this team, but all of the teams, that we've got professionals dedicated to that. And the more we do our work with other agencies outside, you can see that move in society for a better equality, you know, around the sexes, around gender ideas, and around other issues of equality in society. There is a move there. So we just need to kind of pick up the baton and keep running with it, basically.
Fantastic. Wow. I mean, I obviously we could just carry this conversation on and on and on. There's no two ways about that. And so this really has represented a kind of tip of the iceberg moment. But, you know, it's what a discussion. And I hope that anybody who's been watching this will feed into this discussion as we share this video over social media. So a little bit about Future Men. You can follow us on Twitter at Future Men UK and via our LinkedIn page, Future Men. In my demonstration, as we close this off to all of you, in my expansiveness of my own personal masculinity, I offer you a great big virtual embrace to say thank you all for your time this morning. I mean, the people that you're working with, they're very lucky to have all of you guys. They're very lucky to have Future Men as an organization there. Luck might not be the word, because they've also kind of reached out to us as well. I mean, let's talk about agency as well. So that they're making those positive strides. And aside from that, I wish you guys all the best during the rest of the day. All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks,
Take care.
Chris, for hosting.
All the best.
Cyril.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.